A wealthy man forced his sick daughter to clean the mansion every day, ignoring her suffering. But what no one expected was that the parrot, a mere observer, would become the voice of truth, revealing the cruel reality behind the walls of luxury. The Albuquerque mansion was a monument to opulence, a labyrinth of polished marble and Persian tapestries where every object exuded an exorbitant cost. However, behind the impeccable facade, a shadow of cruelty stretched, silent and relentless. While the millionaire, Dr. Ricardo Albuquerque, dedicated himself to his global business, his wife Sophia orchestrated a private drama, a spectacle of neglect that had her father-in-law's room as its stage. Mr. Armando, Ricardo's father, was an elderly man, frail from ill health and loneliness. His room, though spacious, was a forced refuge where days dragged on in painful monotony. Sophia, with a forced smile and honeyed words, pretended to be the devoted daughter-in-law. "Good morning, Dad. Did you sleep well?" she would ask, her voice laden with an artificial sweetness that didn't reach her cold eyes. The answer, a faint murmur, was invariably ignored. Sophia's routine was meticulously cruel. In the morning, she would bring a tray with what appeared to be a complete breakfast: fresh fruit, toast, coffee. But under the table, a quick and imperceptible movement. Most of the food, carefully prepared by the cook, disappeared into a plastic bag that Sophia hid in her purse to be discarded later. For Mr. Armando, only crumbs remained, a piece of dry bread, a sip of cold tea. "Eat everything, Dad. You need to be strong," she would say, watching him with calculated patience, while the old man's stomach rumbled in protest. Mr. Armando, too weak to confront her, merely nodded, his eyes brimming with a hunger that was not just physical, but also for affection and dignity. He tried to eat the little he was given, each chew a Herculean effort. In the main living room, perched in his golden cage, was Luro, the family's Amazon parrot. With his vibrant green feathers and a perceptive gaze, Luro was more than a pet. He was an attentive observer, a repository of sounds and voices that echoed through the mansion's corridors. He heard Sophia's fake laughs, the hurried footsteps of the servants, and most importantly, the muffled groans coming from Mr. Armando's room. Luro was a master of imitation. He repeated the most common phrases in the house, from the maid's "good morning" to Ricardo's "want a cookie." But in recent days, a new sound had captured his attention. It was a faint voice, almost a whisper, that repeated itself in moments of despair. Luro listened, absorbed, and began to practice. One afternoon, while Sophia was out shopping and Ricardo was still away, the mansion was in a heavy silence. Mr. Armando, with a dry throat and an empty stomach, tried to call for help. "I'm hungry," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible, a lament that was lost in the vast room. Minutes later, an unexpected sound broke the silence. From the main living room where Luro was, came a voice. It wasn't Sophia's voice, nor Ricardo's, nor the maid's. It was an almost perfect imitation, though slightly higher pitched, of Mr. Armando's lament. "I'm hungry," Luro repeated with surprising clarity. Mr. Armando, in his room, heard it. His eyes, previously dull, widened slightly. He couldn't believe it. Was his mind playing tricks on him? Luro, oblivious to the impact of his words, merely bobbed his head, satisfied with his new vocal acquisition. He didn't know it, but that innocent echo would be the first crack in the facade of luxury and lies that Sophia had built, the portent of a truth about to be revealed. The parrot's voice, once merely an amusement, was about to become the voice of justice. The Albuquerque mansion, which once echoed only the heavy silence of neglect, now had a new sound in its soundtrack. Luro, the Amazon parrot, had found his new melody, and he repeated it with a persistence that began to pierce Sophia's bubble of indifference. In the days that followed, the phrase "I'm hungry" became a constant refrain. Luro repeated it in the morning, during lunch, and in the evening, always with the same faint, desperate intonation he had absorbed from Mr. Armando. Sophia initially tried to ignore it. "Silly parrot," she would murmur, rolling her eyes as she passed the cage. But the incessant repetition began to irritate her. It was like a constant reminder of her own cruelty, an echo she couldn't silence. One morning, as Sophia prepared to discard most of her father-in-law's breakfast, Luro began his chorus. I'm hungry, he squawked, loud enough to be heard from Mr. Armando's room. Sophia felt a shiver. "Shut up, Luro," she hissed with contained anger. The parrot, however, merely bobbed his head, as if understanding her irritation, and repeated the phrase with even more vigor. Mr. Armando, in his bed, heard the parrot. A strange mix of hope and despair filled his heart. It was his voice, his pain, echoed by an innocent creature. He wanted to scream, he wanted someone to hear, but his throat was dry and his body too weak for any effort. It was at the end of the week that Ricardo Albuquerque finally returned from his business trip. Tired, but satisfied with the deals closed, he entered the mansion, eager to reunite with his family. Sophia greeted him with a radiant smile and a tight hug, the image of the perfect wife. "My love, it's so good you're back. I missed you so much," she said, kissing him. "Me too, darling." "How have things been here?" Ricardo asked, as he headed to the main living room to put down his briefcase. It was then that he heard it, a high-pitched but unmistakable sound. "I'm hungry," squawked Luro, who was perched in his golden cage, watching the newcomer with his curious eyes. Ricardo stopped, confused. He turned to the parrot. "Luro, what's that? A new phrase?" he asked with a slight smile. Sophia, who was right behind him, felt a chill down her spine. She quickly intervened. "Oh, that parrot. He's got a strange habit lately. He repeats everything he hears. Must have picked it up from a TV show or an employee. Don't worry, my love." Ricardo frowned. "But the voice, it sounds so weak. And the phrase, 'I'm hungry'?" he repeated, his curiosity turning into a slight apprehension. He had known Luro for years. The parrot was a master at imitating, but that voice had a particularity, a fragility that bothered him. "It's just a phase, Ricardo. He's a parrot, you know how they are, always learning new things." Sophia tried to downplay, her voice a little higher than usual. She tried to change the subject. "How about a delicious dinner? The cook prepared your favorite dish." But Ricardo wasn't entirely convinced. He looked at Luro again. The parrot, as if to reinforce the message, repeated, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry." The repetition now seemed more insistent, almost a plea. In the following days, Luro's phrase became a constant nuisance for Ricardo. He heard the parrot while having coffee, while reading the newspaper, and even at night, when the mansion was silent. The faint voice, the contained lament, began to infiltrate his thoughts. He observed Sophia, who always had a ready excuse, a nervous laugh to ward off the strangeness. "Dad is fine, Ricardo. I ate with him this morning. He ate everything," she would say with a forced smile whenever Ricardo asked about his father. But Ricardo noticed something about his father. Armando seemed thinner, paler, and his eyes had a glimmer of sadness and tiredness that worried him. However, whenever he asked, Armando merely shook his head weakly, unable or unwilling to speak. The seed of distrust had been planted. Luro's voice, once a mere amusement, was now a constant alarm. Ricardo began to connect the dots. The parrot's faint voice, the insistence of the phrase, his father's condition, Sophia's evasive excuses. A feeling of unease grew in his chest. He needed to know the truth. He could no longer ignore what his instincts and, strangely, his parrot were trying to tell him. One night, while Sophia slept soundly, Ricardo got up. He walked to the main living room, where Luro slept in his cage. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He looked at the parrot, Then, at his father's room, the decision was made. He needed eyes where he couldn't be, ears where he couldn't hear. He needed to see what was really happening behind the facade of luxury and lies. The next day, Ricardo would make a call, one that would forever change the fate of the Albuquerques. Ricardo didn't waste time. With his mind still disturbed by Luro's insistent voice and his father's frail image, he made the call. It wasn't a common call. He contacted a security specialist, someone he trusted, who could discreetly install a surveillance system in the mansion. "I need hidden cameras, imperceptible, especially in my father's room and around the kitchen," Ricardo instructed, his voice low and firm, laden with an urgency he rarely showed. The professional, accustomed to the discretion required by high-profile clients, assured him that the work would be done without raising suspicion. The installation was quick and efficient. In a few hours, small black dots, almost invisible, were strategically positioned. In Mr. Armando's room, in the dining room, and even in a corner of the kitchen where food trays were prepared. Sophia, immersed in her routine of appearances and neglect, noticed nothing. She continued to parade through the mansion with her false sweetness, oblivious to the electronic eyes that now recorded her every move. Luro, in his golden cage, continued his chorus. "I'm hungry, I'm hungry," he repeated, Mr. Armando's faint voice echoing through the corridors, a constant reminder of the truth that was about to come to light. Ricardo, in turn, spent hours in his office, his eyes fixed on a hidden monitor. With each click, a piece of his world crumbled. The first images were shocking. He saw Sophia enter his father's room with the breakfast tray, a forced smile plastered on her face. But instead of leaving the food, she waited for the right moment. A quick movement of her hands, and most of the food disappeared into a plastic bag. For Mr. Armando, only crumbs remained, a glass of water, perhaps a piece of withered fruit. Ricardo's heart tightened. He watched his father, thin and pale, try to eat the little he was given, each chew a painful effort. Anger and disbelief boiled within him. How could Sophia, the woman he loved, the mother of his children, be so cruel? He rewound the images, watched again, searching for an explanation, a justification, but found nothing but coldness and calculated malice. With each new recording, the truth became clearer and more painful. He saw her discard entire meals, invent excuses for the cook, and even reprimand his father for not having an appetite, while the old man wasted away in silence. One afternoon, Ricardo witnessed a scene that made him freeze. Sophia entered his father's room with lunch. Mr. Armando, his voice almost inaudible, asked for a little more juice. Sophia, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, replied, "Oh, Dad, the doctor said you need to control your sugar. It's for your own good." And, without hesitation, she removed the glass of juice, leaving only a small sip of water. Then, she turned to the camera, unaware that she was being watched, and threw most of the food into a bag, which she hid in her designer purse. At that moment, as Ricardo watched the image of his father, his eyes brimming with hunger and despair, and that of Sophia, with her cold and calculated cruelty, something broke inside him. The seed of distrust had germinated into a tree of bitter certainty. Luro's voice, which once seemed a mere parrot's whim, was now a deafening scream in his mind. "I'm hungry!" the parrot squawked, and Ricardo finally understood the weight of those words. He turned off the monitor, his face contorted in a mix of pain and fury. The betrayal was deep, the cruelty unforgivable. His wife, the woman he had sworn to love and protect, was slowly killing his father. The Albuquerque mansion, which he had built as a refuge of love and prosperity, had become a prison of suffering and deceit. Ricardo knew he could no longer postpone the confrontation. The truth had been revealed, and now he needed to act. Justice, though late, would come. And Sophia, the queen of that farce, would be unmasked. Ricardo turned off the monitor, but the images of that cruel afternoon continued to replay in his mind like a private horror film. His father's pale, hungry face, his eyes brimming with supplication, and Sophia's cold smile as she discarded the food with shocking indifference. Anger bubbled in his chest, mixed with a deep pain and disbelief that left him breathless. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, was a monster. He rose from the chair, his body rigid, every muscle tense. There was no more room for doubt, for excuses, for the facade of a perfect life. The truth, naked and raw, had been revealed, and he could no longer ignore it. He needed to confront her, unmask her, and put an end to that silent torture. It was night. Sophia was in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine, a glass of wine in her hand, the image of bourgeois tranquility. Ricardo descended the stairs, his firm steps echoing in the mansion's silence. Sophia looked up, a sweet, forced smile appearing on her lips. "Ricardo, my love, so glad you came out of the office. I thought you'd spend the night working. Come, sit. Have some wine with me," she said, extending her hand to him. Ricardo didn't move. His eyes, once full of love and admiration, now stared at her with a cold, cutting intensity that made her recoil slightly. "No, Sophia, I won't sit down, and I won't have wine." Ricardo's voice was low, but laden with an authority she rarely heard. "We need to talk." Sophia's smile faltered. She sensed the gravity in his tone. "Talk? About what, my dear? Did something happen at work?" "Yes, Sophia, something very serious happened. Something that is happening right under our roof." He took a step forward, his voice gaining strength. "It happened to my father." Sophia's face paled. She tried to hide it, but a subtle tremor passed through her hands. "To Mr. Armando, but he's fine. Ricardo, I saw him this morning. He ate a little, as always. You know how he's been without appetite." "Without appetite?" Ricardo laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. "Or without food, Sophia? Which one?" She stood up, the wineglass trembling in her hand. "What are you implying, Ricardo? I take care of your father with all my affection. I feed him, give him his medicine, keep him company. How can you even think such a thing?" "I'm not thinking, Sophia. I'm seeing," he said, his voice rising a notch. "I'm seeing everything, every crumb you deny, every meal you throw away, every lie you tell." Sophia's eyes widened. She tried to compose herself, her mind working frantically to find a way out. "You're delusional, Ricardo. Who put these ideas in your head? Is it the cook? Some envious employee?" "No, Sophia, it wasn't anyone. It was me. I saw it." Ricardo approached her, his eyes fixed on hers. "I saw you with my own eyes. I saw you discarding my father's food. I saw him wasting away day after day while you pretended to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law." A heavy silence fell over the room. Sophia was speechless, her face contorted in a mix of shock and terror. It was then that, from the golden cage in the room, came a familiar sound, an echo of the pain Ricardo had witnessed. "I'm hungry! I'm hungry!" squawked Luro, with Mr. Armando's faint, drawn-out voice. The sound felt like a punch to Sophia's stomach. She flinched, as if the parrot were a direct accuser, a living witness to her cruelty. Ricardo looked at Luro and then at Sophia, a flicker of fury in his eyes. "He's not a silly parrot, Sophia. He's the voice of truth, my father's voice, the voice of the hunger you imposed on him." Ricardo pointed to the cage, then to her. "You let him starve, Sophia, my own father." Tears began to roll down Sophia's face, but they were not tears of remorse, but of despair and anger at having been discovered. "No, Ricardo, it's not what it looks like. I was trying to control his diet. The doctor said he needed to lose weight. I was just following instructions." "Lie!" Ricardo exploded, his patience exhausted. "You were killing him, Sophia, slowly, cruelly, and why? For money? For power? To get rid of a burden? It doesn't matter. Nothing justifies what you did." He took his phone from his pocket and opened an app. I have everything recorded, Sophia. Every moment, every act of cruelty. You have nowhere to run. No more lies can save you. Sophia's face fell apart. Terror mixed with impotent rage. She knew she was lost. The facade had crumbled. I want you out of this house, Sophia. Now. Ricardo's voice was cold and definitive. Take your most essential belongings. Tomorrow my lawyers will contact you, and don't try to approach my father. Never again. Sophia tried to argue, to plead, but Ricardo didn't listen. His eyes were fixed on her, without any trace of the love he had once felt. The Albuquerque mansion, once a symbol of their union, was now the stage of her ruin. The Queen had been unmasked, and her reign of cruelty was coming to an end. As Sophia climbed the stairs, sobbing with anger and humiliation, Luro, from the cage, repeated one last time, with a faint and moving voice, "I'm hungry! I'm hungry!" Ricardo closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words, but also a hint of relief. The darkness had been exposed. Now, it was time to rescue his father. "I'm hungry!" How dare he? Injustice suffocated her. "Ricardo, is that you?" "Yes, Dad, it's me. I'm here. Forgive me, Dad, Mr. I know, Dad, I know, but it's over. Never again, I promise. And bring it here immediately." Maria, who had always suspected Sophia's treatment but never dared to question it, nodded with watery eyes. "Yes, Mr. Ricardo. Right away. Slowly, Dad. Take your time. Mr. Thank you, my son. Thank you." Ricardo didn't answer. Mr. Ricardo sat on the edge of the bed, his hand still holding his father's, which now felt a little warmer. Mr. Armando, exhausted, had closed his eyes but wasn't sleeping deeply. He was just resting, his body relaxing for the first time in a long while. Ricardo watched each shallow breath, each fragile movement, and a new wave of guilt washed over him. Food alone wasn't enough. His father needed urgent medical care. "Dad," Ricardo whispered, lightly squeezing the old man's hand. "I'm calling a doctor now. Someone trustworthy to take care of you." Mr. Armando slowly opened his eyes, a glimmer of understanding in them. "You don't need to, my son. I'm fine now that you're here." "No, Dad, you do. You're very weak. I should have noticed sooner. I'm so sorry." Ricardo's voice faltered again. He stood up and grabbed the phone, dialing the number of Dr. Almeida, the family doctor for years, a discreet and reliable man. "Dr. Almeida, it's Ricardo Albuquerque. I need you to come to the mansion immediately. It's an emergency with my father." Ricardo kept his voice firm, but the urgency was palpable. The doctor, accustomed to the Albuquerque's discretion, promised to arrive in 15 minutes. While waiting, Ricardo returned to his father's bed. Maria, with her characteristic discretion, entered the room with a basin of warm water, clean towels, and some hygiene products. Her eyes, still watery, met Ricardo's in a silent understanding of complicity and sadness. "Mr. Ricardo, if you'll allow me, I'll help Mr. Armando freshen up a bit. He needs a bath, but he's too weak for that now." Ricardo nodded, grateful. "Please, Maria, do whatever is necessary, and prepare the main guest room, the most comfortable one, for him. He won't be staying here anymore." The decision was firm. The room, once a refuge, was now a painful reminder of suffering. Maria, with gentle and experienced movements, began to clean Mr. Armando's face and hands, who seemed to relax under the careful touch. "Thank you, Maria," he murmured, his voice a little more audible. Ricardo watched, his heart aching. He felt like a stranger in his own home, a spectator to the pain that he, through his blindness, had allowed. The image of Sophia, with her empty threat, seemed insignificant compared to his father's fragility. His anger at her was a cold, constant fire, but now his priority was Mr. Armando's recovery. 15 minutes later, Dr. Almeida arrived, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose and a serious expression. Ricardo led him directly to his father's room, briefly explaining the situation, omitting the more sordid details of Sophia's cruelty, but making the abandonment clear. The doctor examined Mr. Armando with care and professionalism. With each touch, each check, the expression on his face grew more serious. He took his blood pressure, listened to his heart and lungs, and examined his pale skin and sunken eyes. "Mr. Albuquerque," Dr. Almeida said, turning to Ricardo with a serious voice, "your father is in a state of severe malnutrition. There are signs of dehydration and extreme muscle weakness. It's a miracle he hasn't had more serious complications. We need to admit him immediately for supervised recovery." The doctor's words confirmed Ricardo's worst fears. "Admit him. Will he be okay, doctor?" "With proper care, yes. But it will be a long process. He needs IV fluids, nutritional supplements, and constant monitoring. We cannot risk him staying at home, even with the best care at this stage." Ricardo nodded, the decision weighing heavily on his chest, but knowing it was the right one. "All right, doctor, make the arrangements. I'll go with him." While Dr. Almeida made the necessary calls, Maria helped Mr. Armando get dressed in clean, comfortable clothes. The old man, though weak, seemed to accept the situation with quiet resignation, trusting Ricardo. Luro, from the living room, remained silent. His mission was accomplished. The truth had been revealed, and justice, though painful, was beginning to make its way. Ricardo took his father's hand again, feeling the promise of a future of healing and care. The mansion, though still bearing the scars of the past, began to breathe an air of hope. The darkness had been exposed, and now the light of recovery was beginning to shine. Mister, you don't need to, my son." "No, Dad, you do. You're very weak." "Doctor." Mr. Ricardo nodded, grateful. "Please, Maria, do whatever is necessary. Armando." The doctor examined Mr. Albuquerque. "Doctor, admit him?" "All right, doctor, make the arrangements. I'll go with him." While Dr. Almeida, with the efficiency of someone who deals with emergencies for influential families, made the necessary calls. In a few minutes, a specialized medical team and a private ambulance were on their way to the Albuquerque mansion. Ricardo watched his father, his heart aching, but with an iron determination. There was no more room for hesitation or blindness. Maria, with a mother's tenderness, helped Mr. Armando get dressed. She chose soft cotton pajamas and a comfortable bathrobe, ensuring that every movement was slow and careful. The old man, though visibly weak, seemed to accept the situation with quiet resignation, a silent trust in Ricardo that broke his son's heart. He murmured thanks to Maria, his voice almost inaudible, but the glimmer in his eyes was one of gratitude. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything will be fine. I'll be with you the whole time," Ricardo promised, kneeling beside the bed, holding his father's hand firmly. Mr. Armando merely nodded, a faint smile curving his parched lips. That smile, so rare lately, was a ray of sunshine amidst the storm Ricardo had faced. Luro, from the living room, observed the commotion. Perched on his stand, he remained silent, as if he knew his part in the story was over. His small mission was accomplished. The discreet siren of the ambulance sounded in the distance, growing in intensity until it stopped in front of the mansion's imposing door. 2 paramedics entered, equipped and professional, led by Dr. Almeida. They brought a special stretcher designed for transporting frail patients. "Mr. Armando, we're going to take you to the hospital now. You'll receive the best care," one of the paramedics said in a calm, reassuring voice. With coordinated and gentle movements, they transferred Mr. Armando to the stretcher. Ricardo stayed by his father's side, helping where he could, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort. The mansion, once a stage of silent cruelty, now witnessed an act of rescue and love. The journey to the hospital was quick and smooth. Ricardo followed in the ambulance, his eyes fixed on his father. Each beat of the old man's heart, each shallow breath, was a vivid reminder of lost time, of the pain he hadn't perceived. Guilt was a heavy burden, but the hope of recovery began to lighten its weight. Arriving at Santa Clara Hospital, one of the city's most renowned institutions, Mr. Armando was taken directly to a private suite, already prepared. Additional nurses and doctors awaited, ready to begin treatment. "Dr. Almeida has already informed us of the situation, Mr. Albuquerque," said a head nurse with a welcoming smile. "We'll start with intravenous hydration and some blood tests to assess the full nutritional picture." As the medical team worked efficiently and discreetly, Ricardo watched. A thin needle was inserted into his father's pale arm, and the IV fluid began to drip, a visible symbol of life being restored. Mr. Armando seemed exhausted, but the tension in his face gradually lessened. Ricardo sat in the armchair beside the bed, refusing to leave. He saw his father connected to monitors, displaying his vital signs, each beep a sound of relief. The image of Sophia, with her cold cruelty, seemed distant, almost unreal. His priority now was only one: Mr. Armando's recovery. "I won't leave here, Dad," Ricardo whispered. His voice choked with emotion. "I'll stay with you until you're strong again. I'll never leave you alone again." Mr. Armando briefly opened his eyes, a glimmer of gratitude and relief in them. He tried to raise his hand, and Ricardo held it tenderly. It was a new beginning, a long and difficult path, but one that would be walked together. The darkness had been exposed, and now the light of recovery was beginning to shine brighter than ever. The soft hum of the monitors filled the silence of the private suite. Ricardo didn't move from the armchair beside the bed, his eyes fixed on his father. The intravenous fluid dripped rhythmically, a lifeline slowly filling Mr. Armando's emaciated body. With each passing hour, the extreme paleness in his face seemed to recede a little, replaced by a slightly healthier, almost imperceptible coloration, but one that Ricardo noticed with obsessive attention. Nurses entered and exited discreetly, checking vital signs, adjusting medication, ensuring the patient's comfort. They spoke in whispers, respecting the atmosphere of fragility and Ricardo's silent vigil. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a gentle gaze, brought Ricardo a coffee and insisted he eat something. He refused the coffee but accepted a sandwich, taking only a few bites, his throat too tight to swallow. Dr. Almeida returned a few hours later, in the early evening, for a new assessment. He examined Mr. Armando with the same seriousness, but a slight nod indicated progress, however minimal. The initial blood tests confirm severe malnutrition and dehydration, Mr. Albuquerque, he explained to Ricardo, stepping away from the bed. But the kidneys are functioning, and the heart, though weak, is responding well. It's a good sign. He will need a special diet, supplements, and a lot of patience. Recovery will be gradual. "Will he make a full recovery, doctor?" Ricardo asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and anxiety. The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses and massaging the bridge of his nose. "With time and the right care, yes, but he is very debilitated. Age is also a factor. The most important thing now is to stabilize him and reverse the malnutrition. We are doing our best to make him feel comfortable and safe." Safe. The word echoed in Ricardo's mind. How many years had his father not felt safe in his own home? Guilt struck him again, a cold wave that threatened to drown him. He had been blind, arrogant, negligent. The image of Sophia, with her false smile and calculated cruelty, flashed in his mind. But he pushed it away. It wasn't time for her, it was time for his father. The night slowly advanced. Ricardo didn't sleep. He watched his father, every breath, every small movement of his fingers. At one point, Mr. Armando opened his eyes a little clearer than before. His eyes met Ricardo's, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared on his lips. "Son," he whispered, his voice still weak, but with a tone of peace Ricardo hadn't heard in years. "I'm here, Dad," Ricardo replied, leaning in, holding the old man's hand with both of his. "Always here." "Thank you," Mr. Armando murmured, and his eyes closed again, but this time it seemed a deeper, more peaceful sleep, a sleep of someone who finally feels safe. Ricardo felt a tear roll down his face. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of relief and a silent promise. He would spend every day, every hour, making up for lost time, for the pain inflicted. The mansion, with its bitter memories, would be a place of healing, but his father would not return to that dark room. He would have the best, the most comfortable, the safest. The sun began to peek through the suite's curtains, painting the room with soft shades of orange and pink. The first night had passed. The light of recovery was not a sudden flash, but a slow and gradual dawn, promising a new day, a new beginning. Ricardo knew the road would be long, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was on the right path. And he wouldn't be alone. He had his father and the promise of a future where care and love would prevail over darkness. The sun, now higher, bathed the suite in a more intense light, but Ricardo barely noticed. His eyes were heavy, his throat dry, but the physical exhaustion was insignificant compared to the torrent of emotions that overwhelmed him. With each deeper breath his father took, with each slight movement of the sheets, a subtle relief washed over him. He hadn't slept, but he felt more awake than ever. Dr. Almeida returned for the morning rounds, accompanied by a nutritionist. "Good morning, Mr. Albuquerque," the doctor said, his tone more optimistic. "Your father had a stable night. Today's blood tests show a slight improvement in hydration levels. Dr. Lucia will present the nutritional plan." Dr. Lucia, a young and empathetic woman, explained in detail the rigorous diet Mr. Armando would follow: small portions of nutrient-rich foods, vitamin supplements, and constant monitoring to ensure that his digestive system, debilitated by deprivation, could absorb nutrients properly. "It will be a slow process, Mr. Ricardo," she emphasized, "but with patience and consistency, we will see results." Ricardo listened attentively, asking questions, absorbing every piece of information. He felt an urgency to learn, to understand everything his father needed. The negligence of the past haunted him, and he was determined not to fail again. As the medical team left, Ricardo picked up his phone. It was time to deal with the other part of his life that had been turned upside down. He dialed his lawyer, Dr. Gustavo. "Gustavo, it's me, Ricardo. I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for hesitation. "My father is hospitalized, and I need to immediately start the divorce process from Sofia. I want her expelled from the mansion and to have no access to any of my assets. And I want her to be held legally accountable for the cruelty she inflicted on my father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ricardo, this is serious. Do you have proof?" "I do. Hidden cameras, recordings, witnesses. I have everything, Gustavo. She let him starve, throwing away his food. I want her to pay for it, and I want her banned from my life and my father's life forever." Ricardo's voice was laden with contained fury, but also with a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. The lawyer, accustomed to the twists and turns of the wealthy's lives, promised to be at the hospital in an hour. Hanging up the phone, Ricardo looked at his father. Mr. Armando slept peacefully, his face a little less tense, his breathing more regular. The image of Luro, the parrot, came to his mind. The small animal, with his persistence and loyalty, had been the catalyst for all the truth. He was a silent hero, an unexpected guardian. Ricardo promised himself that Luro would also receive the best care and affection. Morning turned into afternoon. Ricardo allowed Maria, who had arrived at the hospital with clean clothes for him, to convince him to eat a decent meal in the cafeteria. He ate mechanically, his thoughts always returning to his father's room. When Dr. Gustavo arrived, Ricardo took him to a private waiting room. He narrated the events with calculated coldness, showing the videos on his tablet. The lawyer watched, his face pale, shocked by Sofia's cruelty. "This is shocking, Ricardo. With this evidence, we can achieve not only the divorce with annulment of any of her rights, but also a criminal action for elder abuse," Dr. Gustavo stated, his voice grave. "I will initiate the procedures immediately. She will be notified today and will have to leave the mansion." Ricardo nodded. Justice for his father was beginning to take shape, but he knew the emotional battle would be long. He returned to the suite, sitting again beside his father. Mr. Armando's hand was a little warmer in his. It was a sign, a small but significant step towards healing. The darkness was being dispelled, not by a flash, but by the persistence of a new dawn, a dawn of love and redemption. "Good morning, Mr. Dr. Lucia will present the nutritional plan." "Dr. Ricardo," she emphasized, "but with patience and consistency, we will see results." Ricardo listened attentively, asking questions, absorbing every piece of information. "Gustavo, my father is hospitalized, and I want her to be held legally accountable for the cruelty she inflicted on my father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ricardo, this is serious. Do you have proof?" "I do. Hidden cameras, recordings, witnesses. I have everything, Gustavo. And I want her banned from my life and my father's life forever." Ricardo's voice was laden with contained fury, but also with a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. Doctor, she will be notified today and will have to leave the mansion." Ricardo nodded. As Ricardo watched his father's peaceful sleep, the wheels of justice began to turn with relentless speed. Dr. Gustavo, a man of his word and action, wasted no time. From his office, he triggered the legal mechanisms that would seal Sofia's fate. The divorce notification, accompanied by a restraining order and a summons to answer criminal charges for elder abuse, was prepared and delivered by a court officer at the Albuquerque mansion late that afternoon. Sofia was in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine, with the bored expression of someone who had nothing left to do but wait for her husband to return. The doorbell rang, and she, annoyed, sent one of the maids to answer it. Minutes later, the maid returned, pale, with an official envelope in her hands. "Madam, it's for you." A court officer brought it. Sofia took the envelope with disdain, her brow furrowed. "Court officer! What nonsense is this?" She tore the seal with a brusque movement and began to read. The color drained from her face as her eyes scanned the cold, formal lines of the document. Divorce, abuse, evidence, expulsion. "No! This is impossible!" she exclaimed, her voice rising an octave. Her eyes widened in disbelief and fury. "Ricardo wouldn't do this. He can't." The court officer, who was discreetly waiting at the entrance, stepped forward. "Mrs. Albuquerque, the order is clear. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Your belongings will be packed and sent to an address you provide. Otherwise, the police will be called to ensure compliance with the court order." Sofia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. 24 hours, expelled from her mansion. The mansion she had planned to dominate, where she would be queen. Anger bubbled within her, mixed with a growing panic. This is a setup, a conspiracy. Ricardo is crazy. He has no proof of anything. The court officer remained impassive. "The evidence was presented to the court and deemed sufficient for the issuance of this order, madam. I suggest you contact your lawyer." Sofia threw the papers on the floor, her face contorted in a mask of hatred. "Lawyer? I don't need a lawyer. I'll talk to Ricardo. He'll listen to me. But Ricardo was unavailable. His phone was off, his mind focused exclusively on his father. Sophia tried to call him incessantly, leaving hysterical messages that would never be heard. The cold, hard reality began to set in. She was alone. The next morning, a moving truck and a team of lawyers sent by Dr. Gustavo arrived at the mansion. Sophia, still in denial, tried to resist, but was confronted with legal authority. Her screams and threats were in vain. Her belongings were methodically packed, and she was escorted out of the house she once thought was hers, with only a small handbag. The humiliation was public, and the contemptuous gaze of the maids, who once feared her, was a thorn in her soul. Far away, in the hospital suite, Ricardo felt a bitter relief upon receiving the news that Sophia had been expelled. There was no triumph, only the feeling that a painful stage had been completed. His focus returned to his father, who, though still weak, had managed to ingest a few spoonfuls of nutritious broth. "Good job, Dad," Ricardo whispered, holding the aged hand. "You're fighting, and I'm here with you." Mr. Armando opened his eyes, a glimmer of recognition and affection. He didn't need words. The silence between father and son was filled with a promise of healing and rediscovered love. The darkness had been banished, and the light, though still faint, promised a future where Sophia's cruelty would be just a distant memory, overcome by the strength of forgiveness and redemption. The mansion door closed with a dry thud behind Sophia, a sound that echoed in her chest like the final strike of a hammer. On the sidewalk, under the cold gaze of Ricardo's lawyers and the indifference of the staff who once served her, she felt stripped of everything, with only a small handbag and the poison of humiliation coursing through her veins. She hailed a taxi, ordering the driver to take her to the city's most luxurious hotel, a place where the facade of opulence could still mask the internal ruin. In the presidential suite, the luxury seemed to mock her. The expensive champagne, the panoramic city view, the oppressive silence. Sophia threw her suitcase on the floor and her phone on the bed, the device vibrating with unanswered calls from her own lawyer, whom she had dismissed for considering him weak. Anger consumed her, a cold, relentless flame. "Ricardo, you bastard!" she growled, her voice hoarse. "You'll regret this. You'll regret it bitterly." She began to pace, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. The image of Mr. Armando's pale face, the parrot's faint voice, everything mingled in her mind. Distorted by the lens of her own wickedness, she felt no guilt, only fury at being caught, at being exposed, the evidence, the videos. How could he have done this? Ricardo's betrayal was unforgivable. She needed a plan, she needed money, she needed to destroy his reputation, tarnish the Albuquerque name. The idea of revenge began to form, a dark and seductive monster, promising a way to reverse her fall. While Sophia's fury solidified into plans of retaliation, in the hospital suite, a different kind of silence prevailed. Ricardo watched his father, who slept a deeper, more peaceful sleep than in recent weeks. Dr. Lucia, the nutritionist, had just left, with a discreet smile. "He's responding well, Mr. Albuquerque. Small portions, but he's accepting them. It's a big step." Ricardo nodded, exhausted, but with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He held his father's hand, feeling the wrinkled skin, but now with a more present warmth. "You'll be okay, Dad," he whispered, his voice choked. "I promise." The nurse entered carrying a small cage covered by a cloth. Ricardo raised an eyebrow, confused. "Maria insisted, Mr. Ricardo," the nurse explained with a gentle smile. "She said he would do Mr. Armando good." Ricardo lifted the cloth, and there was Luro, his eyes bright and curious. The parrot tilted his head, watching Ricardo, and then let out an "I'm hungry" in his own voice before imitating Mr. Armando's faint voice, but this time with a softer tone, almost like a lament. A wave of emotion hit Ricardo. Luro, the little hero. He extended his finger, and the parrot gently nipped it. "Hello, Luro," Ricardo said, his voice choked. "You saved us, buddy." Mr. Armando, as if feeling the familiar presence, slowly opened his eyes. His eyes, once dull, now had a glimmer of recognition. He looked at Ricardo, then at the cage. "Luro," he murmured, his voice weak but audible. Ricardo felt tears well up. It was the first time his father had spoken anything beyond groans or unintelligible whispers since he had been hospitalized. "Yes, Dad, it's Luro. He came to see you." The parrot, as if understanding, let out a joyful chirp and then repeated, this time with more force, "I'm hungry." But it wasn't the weak, suffering voice from before. It was his voice, the parrot's, almost as a reminder that hunger had been banished and that now there was hope. Dr. Almeida, who was making his rounds, entered the suite and witnessed the scene. A genuine smile formed on his face. "This is excellent, Mr. Albuquerque. Emotional stimulus is vital for recovery, and it seems Mr. Luro is an excellent therapist." Ricardo felt a warmth spread through his chest. The battle was still long. His father's recovery would be a slow and arduous process, and the legal battle against Sophia promised to be bitter. But at that moment, with his father awake, Luro nearby, and the promise of a future, he knew that the darkness was, in fact, dissipating. The light of hope, once a mere glimpse, now radiated with renewed strength, guiding him towards a new dawn. "Ricardo, you'll regret it bitterly." She began to pace, her heels sinking into the plush carpet, the evidence, the videos. She needed money. She picked up her phone and, ignoring calls from her lawyer, dialed a number she kept for emergencies, a contact in the underworld of sensationalist media. "I have a story," she said, her voice icy, "a story that will shake the São Paulo elite, and I want it told my way." "Good morning, Mr. Dr. Lucia will present the nutritional plan." "Dr. Ricardo," she emphasized, "but with patience and consistency we will see results." Ricardo listened attentively, asking questions, absorbing every piece of information. "Gustavo, my father is hospitalized, and I want her to be held legally accountable for the cruelty she inflicted on my father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ricardo, this is serious. Do you have proof?" "I do. Hidden cameras, recordings, witnesses. I have everything, Gustavo, and I want her banned from my life and my father's life forever." Ricardo's voice was laden with contained fury, but also with a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. "Mr. When Dr. Shi will be notified today and will have to leave the mansion." Ricardo nodded. "Mr." The light of hope, once a mere glimpse, now radiated with renewed strength, guiding him towards a new dawn, a dawn of love, care, and the unwavering certainty that in the end, truth always finds its way to the light.